Phoenix Rising. Written by 𝗕𝗏𝒊𝒙. Narrated by Gary Bennett.
Chapter 1. The average person lives 4 to 6 years after an early-onset Alzheimer's diagnosis. Dan's came 18 months ago. He could feel his mind melting away. Some days were a haze of memories jumbled together, as if lived all at once. Today he could remember the look on his wife's face, the first time he forgot who she was. He took a deep breath to steady himself. When he started having trouble remembering, he chalked it up to his time with the army in Iraq. Gulf War illness, they called it. A strange cocktail of maladies that afflicted tens of thousands of servicemen. The litany of afflictions was as long as Dan's arm, and memory problems topped the list. Dan knew something else was going on when he started hallucinating. The lights would overwhelm him with brightness, his pupils shrinking to a speck as he squeezed his eyelids closed. Shadows would pop out at him, making him jump. Sometimes sounds wouldn't process, coming into his mind as a garble. His wife broke down the day they got the diagnosis, while Dan sat rubbing his hands, stunned into silence. He sat on his bed, eyes still heavy with sleep, not quite ready to start the day. His mother, Susan, broke his reverie, knocking on the door jamb to rouse him. "Dan, we've got to get ready to go soon. Do you need help?" Monica followed Jason to the mechanic so she could give him a ride back. I swear breaking cars must be genetic as often as he has to get something repaired. He drives just like you. Anyway, I'm going to bring you to your appointment. We're going to leave a little early to avoid traffic. He smiled weakly, thankful for her selflessness. "No, I'll be okay. I'll be right there," Dan said sleepily. "Well, honey, let me help you get dressed. The appointment isn't too long from now," his mother said, moving into the room to help him out of his bathrobe and into the sweats his wife had laid on the bed. She reached out to touch him. "No, damn it!" he screamed like a precocious 2-year-old. "I can do it myself today." He jumped away from her touch, the anger filling him with seething hot fury. He knew the anger was unfounded, that it was the dementia, but he couldn't control it, couldn't stop it, as if it had a life of its own. He snatched the clothes off the bed and stomped to his bathroom, slamming the door. "I'll just be in the kitchen then, dear," his ever-patient mother replied. "I have a cup of coffee waiting for you along with your pills." Dan leaned against the bathroom door and slid to the floor, the anger fading just as quickly as it had come. The rage beast was letting go of its control over his mind. His head fell, and he cradled his knees, eyes wet with salty tears. Was he even himself anymore? When the first blue box appeared in his vision, he read it, then dismissed it as just another hallucination from his broken mind. A box, like a window on his computer, saying something about a dungeon world. A countdown appeared, and he waved his hand to shoo away the box. Was his mind this broken already? A loud crash from below drew his attention, so he stood and slipped into his clothes. He noticed his reflection and made eye contact with a man in the bathroom mirror. He barely recognized himself. Dark, disheveled hair falling into dull eyes with heavy bags. Unattended facial scruff that was long past 5 o'clock shadow. He shook his head, disgusted, and left the room. When his feet hit the top of the stairs, more boxes appeared in his vision. "Congratulations! You have been spawned in the Shasta National Forest, level 100+ zone. You have spawned in the level 80 section of the forest. You have received 5,500 XP, delayed. As per Dungeon World Development Schedule 124.3.2.2, inhabitants assigned to a region with a recommended level 25 or more above the inhabitant's current level will receive 1 small perk. As per Dungeon World Development Schedule 124.3.2.3, inhabitants assigned to a region with a recommended level of 50 or more above the inhabitant's current level will receive 1 medium perk. As per Dungeon World Development Schedule 124.3.2.4, inhabitants assigned to a region with a recommended level 75 or more above the inhabitant's current level will receive 1 large perk. Dan shook his head violently to clear the box away and lost his balance. He crashed into the wall, his body sliding down the stairs to the bottom, arms flailing to grab onto anything that would stop him. At 48, his body was still healthy, and a firefighting career had made him strong, so he suffered no damage except another wound to his pride. He slammed his fist into the wall, the pain evicting the rage. "Dan, are you all right? It's time to make that switch. We can't have you living with stairs like these." His mother, just shy of 70, was still strong and healthy. She and some friends had started a walking group in town, and on any day could be seen together talking and power walking in their 1980s sun visors and hip packs. As strong as she was still an older woman, all of 120 pounds soaking wet, and had to struggle to lift her adult son. "What are you talking about?" Dan asked, not knowing if he didn't remember or if he had never known. He used the wall as leverage to aid her in getting him up. "Monica and I talked about moving you two into the mother-in-law unit so you wouldn't have to deal with the stairs," his mother replied, as she gave him a once-over to check for any injuries. "Are you okay? Does it hurt anywhere?" The simple question sent Dan's mind spiraling. Flashes of memories ripped through his consciousness, replacing his awareness of the present with brief moments of his past. The woman in the room was pressing her hands to his chest, probing him, the words coming out of her mouth mere noises that made no sense. "Get away!" Dan shouted, and brushed the strange woman away. He dropped to the floor, put his head between his knees, and rocked. He looked up to see his mother, worry contorting her face as she stared at her son. "Dan, honey, can you get up?" She steadied him as he got to his feet. "What's going on?" he asked. The boxes appeared again in his vision, and again he shook his head to make them go away. They made no sense. Weren't we supposed to be going somewhere? His mom nodded, her concern melting to resolve. "We've got your doctor appointment in Shasta Lake. You have to eat first, though, dear." She held her hand out to him and squeezed his when he placed it in hers. She guided him to his seat, and the familiarity of his mom doting on him, feeding him and making sure he had enough to drink, calmed him down. As Susan helped Dan with his medication, she chattered on about the latest meal she was preparing for someone in town who had just had a baby. When she noticed Dan had cleaned his plate, she stood up. "Do you want some more? It's no problem to make more," she asked. Dan shook his head and rubbed his stomach. "I'm stuffed." Susan smiled at him. "Good. I packed some snacks in the car anyway, in case you get hungry. We should probably get going." Dan stood up and she led him out the door to the car, then paused before opening the door to the passenger side and letting Dan in. Chapter 2. Dan's mom drove them down I-5 from their small town on the outskirts of Shasta National Forest towards the city of Shasta Lake. The roads were quiet, with few travelers, only a couple cars in the distance ahead of them. Dan balled his fists, squeezing tight enough to make the knuckles go white. He couldn't remember where he was going, only that it was important. He would have asked his mom, but these weird boxes, like windows on a computer screen, kept popping up in his field of vision. The boxes were offering him choices of a class, things like pyrokinetic, mage, and ranger. It read like when he used to play Dungeons and Dragons. Dan tried to pay close attention to what they were saying, but the boxes kept flickering from one thing to another, as if there was a video glitch. He couldn't concentrate very well anyway. He had something important to do. He looked out the window as the landscape passed by, trying to kickstart his mind into remembering. Another box appeared, describing a blue mage, as a countdown in the corner ticked seconds, indicating there was a little under 50 minutes left. They had only driven a few miles before Dan blinked and waved away another screen. He had been jarred back to reality when the car slowed, and his mother cursed. "What is it? What's going on?" he asked. He couldn't remember hearing his mom curse before. She didn't answer, her knuckles white on the steering wheel as she muscled it onto the shoulder. The power steering no longer working, she pushed the brake, stopping the car. "The car just died. I don't get it." She tried the ignition, turning the key over and over to no avail. Dan stared at her, face blank as he tried to force his mind to function. Another box appeared. Incoming system message. An entity has determined you are a match for a symbiotic partnership. Would you like to accept? Entity, Phoenix. Warning, this is permanent. Dan shook his head, trying to get the box away. His mom needed his help. The box did the weird glitch thing and reappeared in his vision. He didn't know why this kept happening, but he was becoming quite aggravated with the hallucinations from his broken mind. To make it go away, he thought accept at the box, and it flashed yellow and disappeared, only to reappear. Symbiotic relationship formed. Congratulations, world first. As the first individual to form a symbiotic relationship, your symbiosis has been upgraded from commensalism to mutualism. A voice spoke in Dan's mind, startling him. I see neither space nor time can provide a permanent escape from the system. Once again, I am caught within its clutches and bound to the life of a mortal. What is this? Dan asked in a shaky voice. It's okay, dear. I'll just try to reach Monica or AAA, and we can get towed, his mother said, as once again she tried the ignition. Dan jumped when his mom started smacking her phone against the dash. What is wrong with this thing? She gritted through her teeth and took a deep breath, her voice going back to normal. Dan, do you have your phone? She turned to look at him, but he didn't register it as the voice spoke again. Daniel J. Burns, I am the Phoenix. You have accepted the contract of symbiosis with me, and now our lives are entwined. Dan shook his head violently again. The hallucinations were getting worse. He didn't remember the doctors ever telling him he would hear voices like this. No, no! Stop talking to me! He shouted, pressing his hands to the sides of his head. His mother frowned as she watched him. It's okay, dear. It's me, Mom. I'm just going to check your pockets for your phone. She reached to pat his leg where his pant pockets were. I'm not going to hurt you, honey. Not you, Dan said. The voice in my head. First the boxes, now a voice. I think it's getting worse. I assure you, Daniel, your mind is not broken. In fact, it is only through one such as you I may form this bond. In order for a phoenix to bond with another sentient, that sentient must have a disjointed mind. It is the nature of our abilities to be in flux, embracing change and rising from chaos. His mom froze, making eye contact with her son. What did you say? Something about boxes? Yeah, I saw boxes, like computer windows. I don't... You saw them too, his mom cut him off. Wait, you saw the boxes? Dan asked. His breath quickened and his eyes bore into hers. It's always difficult on dungeon worlds for the natives. You have my sympathies. This communication takes much out of me, however, and I cannot keep it active very long. I can sense your thoughts and perceive some of what you perceive. I can tell you are in grave danger. You must get to a lower-level zone soon, or you will die. Either the car isn't working, or the phones? His mother finished her question, which Dan only half heard, as he focused on the voice in his mind. Dan, please be okay. I need you to be able to help us. The worry in his mom's voice sent another cascade of memories through his mind. The day his father died, his mother's grief as she dealt with the loss, her voice when she learned of Dan's condition. Dan shook his head, and this time the memories cleared away, leaving him lucid. Mom, we have to go. We aren't safe here, he said with confidence and unbuckled his seatbelt. Your technology will no longer work now that the system is in place. You must go south, towards where there are more humans. You can be safer there, then you must get stronger, strong enough to free me from my prison. Dan closed his eyes and visualized his thoughts going towards the voice in his mind. Can you hear me? Yes, Daniel, I can hear you. I tire, though, and must end this communication soon. What is this system you're talking about? What kind of danger are we in? The voice in his head made a sound like that of fire popping on hot sap, and Dan recognized it as laughter. That question is one I cannot answer any better than you, I am afraid. The system is the system. It entraps worlds without care. Civilizations rise or fall within its embrace, and entire races have died seeking that answer. This is your new life, your new world. I urge you to find safety. You must level at least once for our bond to help you, but you must get to a lower-level zone, and soon. I must rest now, but I will leave you with this." With those last words came a blinking mail notification in Dan's field of vision as the presence left his mind. Dan smiled as the brain fog cleared, and he was suddenly clear-headed. His mom placed her hand on his shoulder. "Dan?" "Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I'm not gone yet. I was just talking to the thing in my head. It told me we have to go south to get as far away from the forest as we can." "What did those boxes mean? Do you know something?" his mother asked, as she also unbuckled and got out of the car. "Why isn't the car or my phone working?" Dan stretched, flexing his muscles, as if preparing to exercise, reveling in this moment of lucidity, while worrying about how long it would last. He opened his mouth to respond, but snapped it shut as an explosion to the northwest cut off what he was about to say. He watched as a pillar of dark smoke began rising into the sky. Chapter 3. Dan's mom gasped and clenched his arm. "That's near town. What could have happened?" she asked. They stared at the rising cloud of gray smoke, twisting up into the blue sky. "I don't know, but I don't think it's good," Dan spoke without looking away from the smoke. "The voice in my head told me our technology won't work anymore now that we're part of this system. Maybe it has something to do with that." "You really saw the boxes too, then?" his mother confirmed. "And this voice? That's part of it? I didn't know what to make of them before, and we were in such a rush to get you to your appointment, I ignored them. What does this mean? Is it aliens or something?" Dan shrugged. "I'm not sure. But the voice in my head, it called itself the Phoenix, told me we have to get to a lower-level zone, or we might die." She looked at him and raised her eyebrow. "What in the world does that mean?" "I think it's like in that video game Jason plays, World of Warfight or whatever. We have numbered levels that tell us how strong we are. Creatures and other stuff do as well. We must be in an area meant for higher levels." "I don't understand any of that." Dan's mother gripped his arm tighter. "I remember seeing a screen that said I could pick a class or something, but then you fell down the stairs and I ignored it to help you. How do I get that to come up again? How do I know what level I am?" Dan shook his head, his default motion for trying to separate reality from fiction. "I don't know. I don't even know what class I am. I think I saw a message about classes, but don't think I ever got one." The blinking message icon in Dan's field of vision drew his attention. He attempted to look at it, his eyes going wild and swirling in every direction, until he gave up and tried to send a thought at it like he had the voice. The screen opened to reveal a message from the Phoenix. "I cannot help until my energy recovers, but by becoming a symbiont with me, I have been able to craft a class package utilizing your perks you have gained. This package should contain everything to ensure maximum survivability based upon your life experiences. Do you wish to accept the class package? Yes, no. Warning, accepting this class package will consume all perks." Dan didn't know what to do with this information. He didn't know if the Phoenix would make the best decisions for him, or was offering things that would only help itself. He directed a thought towards the system to ask about available classes. A massive list popped up, with most options grayed out as unselectable. He thought perks, and an even larger list bloomed. "I don't have a class yet. It looks like I can choose one, but there are so many choices," he said. The voice, the Phoenix, I guess, created a class package to help survivability, but I don't know if I can trust it. "How do you know all of this?" his mom asked. "I just thought class into the system, and it gave me a list. The same for perks." Susan's eyes went blank for a moment, and then she focused back on Dan. "Oh my, there's so many." "It's kind of intimidating," Dan said. "I know we should get going, but we probably need to try to figure this out first. I want to at least figure out a class. I think we need every advantage if we are in a dangerous area. It's going to take us a while to walk back. Can't we do it as we walk?" Susan asked. "We could, but wouldn't you rather be prepared, just in case something happens on the walk?" Susan gave that a second's thought, then sighed and opened the door to the car to sit on the seat. "That makes sense. I'm just worried," she said. as she kicked her feet in the dirt. She reached through the car and grabbed her purse, pulling out a baggie of cookies. "I'll just give this list a look then. What in the world is Magical Chef?" She took out a cookie and nibbled at it, then handed the bag to Dan, who rolled his eyes at the proffered treats. He was still full from breakfast, but took the bag anyway. He had learned it was easier to just take the food than be constantly asked if he was hungry. Dan walked to the hood of the sedan and sat on it, opening the list of classes. He began to parse through it, but as the information entered his mind, he felt his lucidity slipping. He placed his hands on the hood to steady himself, and the words began to jumble, the letters swirling and making no sense. His vision narrowed, and he heard a scream come from somewhere nearby. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The car felt like it was swaying beneath him, and he lost his grip, his clammy palms slipping out from under him. He slid down the hood and into the dirt. His tenuous grip on reality started to fade, as his eyes fell on the source of the screaming. His mom, dangling in the air by her ankle. His eyes slid down the length of the tendril, hoisting her into the air, a massive plant pulling her to a gaping Venus flytrap like maw. No, Dan thought, not now. With no other options, as his world started to fade to a cacophony of sounds, lights, and memories, he latched on to the one thing he thought could help his mom. He opened the message from the Phoenix and accepted the class package it contained. "Congratulations, you have gained an advanced class. Phoenix, 5,500 delayed XP applied. The Phoenix is an extremely rare class. By utilizing the ability, Rebirth, you gain access to skills from another class, your subclass, dictated by a segment of your memories. Warning, using Rebirth alters what memories you have access to and may cause physical appearance and personality changes. Experience gained is divided between your base class and subclass. Phoenix class abilities. +2 per level in Constitution, Strength, and Agility. +3 per level in Intelligence, Willpower, and Charisma. Additional 4 free attributes per level. +99% fire resistance. +50% mental resistance. Greater elemental affinity, Solar. Class skill. Rebirth. Activating this skill will cause the system to create a new personality based on your current memories and experiences. This new personality will have a subclass that starts at level 1. New personalities drawn upon the matrix of your memories and are therefore always a version of you. Phoenix class pack perk selection. Large perk, Phoenix advanced class. Medium perk, gifted. You have a natural ability to learn quickly. All skills are gained +10% quicker. +10% skill level increase for all skills. Small perk, Paradise Plumage. Created by the master artisans of the planet Paradise, this living outfit is a second skin that uses the thoughts and feelings of its wearer to form its shape and design. Regenerative, will regenerate from even a single cell. Soulbound, cannot be taken or given away. Though it may simulate the look of armor, it offers no protection. Shared Fate, this item shares its owner's resistances. A scream ripped out of Dan's throat. A molten burning started in his veins and melted its way through his blood and muscle. His world was nothing but fire and light, as it felt like his very essence was being burned away to make room for something new. He thrashed on the dirt ground, flailing wildly before going utterly still. Then the world went black. Chapter 4. Danny opened his eyes to a scene he didn't recognize. He was lying on the ground next to a car. He sat up and looked around. His tent was gone, as were the tents of the rest of the troop. Was this a prank? He glanced down to make sure he hadn't been robbed of his clothes. But there it was, his scout uniform in red, gold, and brown. Danny shook his head. Wasn't the uniform supposed to be green and tan? He stood up and brushed himself off. Brow furrowed, his eyes darted around, searching for clarity. He was at the edge of a forest, next to a highway, the straight, multi-lane road disappearing into the horizon. He and his troop had hiked a good 15 miles into the forest the day before. How had he gotten to a highway? "Okay, guys, this is really funny. You totally got me," he shouted into the air, thinking at any moment the rest of the troop would pop out to surprise him. How could he have slept through all of this? Had they drugged him? "Guys?" he shouted again to no answer. He inspected his surroundings. The car in front of him was strange, not like any Buick he had seen before. The modern ones were boxy with sharp lines. This one was rounded and sleek. He shook his head again and blinked. As he did so, a blue box covered in text popped into his vision. "Ah, what the hell?" he screamed and backed up, waving his hands, and landed on his butt, puffs of dust floating up around him. Danny batted at the box unsuccessfully. It didn't seem to harm him, so he read it instead. "Congratulations, you are now Level 1 Phoenix. Congratulations, you have experienced your first rebirth, system assigned. Based on a compartment of memory, you have been assigned the subclass Wilderness Scout and will now have access to the skills from that class. No attributes are gained from subclasses." After reading through the text, the box disappeared, and a floating icon of a blinking question mark replaced it in the top right of his field of vision. After studying it for a second, it disappeared, and another box appeared in the center of his eyesight. "Quests. Save your mother. Save Monica and Jason. Escape to lower level zone." What in the world? Danny's stomach dropped at the first quest, and he eyeballed it to get more information. "Quest. Save your mother from certain death. Taken right in front of you, your mother was brought back to the lair of a carnivorous plant. Time is running out." Danny jumped out of the dirt. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew he wasn't on his scout trip anymore. Something different was going on. He didn't know where these boxes came from or what they meant, but if this one about his mother was true, he knew he couldn't waste time. He spun around, eyes darting about for any sign of whatever creature had his mom. Danny's eyes popped open when he found what he was looking for. This thing wouldn't be too hard to track. There was an indent cleared in the dirt, about 2 feet in width, running past the bushes and through the trees. It seemed to move on a single large foot, like a snail. What shocked him was the strange glowing yellow haze above the creature's trail. When Danny tried to touch the haze, he realized it reacted the same way all the other elements of the system did. He guessed this must be the way this system showed his tracking skill working. With a smirk, Danny set out to follow the obvious trail, when a voice in his head stopped him. "Daniel, I see you have accepted my class selection. Things should be a little easier now. You must go quickly. The world becomes more dangerous with each passing moment." "Who are you? What is going on?" Danny asked. He thought he should be more freaked out by all these strange occurrences, but he was calm, as if he'd experienced this before. Yes. I remember how weak the mental stability is in a new Phoenix. In time, that will change. Communicating like this is very taxing for me, and we do not have long. This too will change as you grow stronger. You have skills that will aid you in this, although the system will always anchor itself first in your memories. It is nothing if not self-preserving. Meanwhile, I must show you something, a way to protect yourself." Danny stood at the edge of the road while visions filled his mind. He watched as strange bird-like creatures flew through the endless skies of a world filled with heat and light. The creatures spread their wings, absorbing the energy from the brilliant suns in the sky. They used this energy to create updrafts of heat to glide on. They converted it into sustenance and breathed great gouts of flame from their mouths. Danny could feel the connection the birds had and felt something within him stir. As the images faded, he lifted his hand and, staring intently beyond the skin of his palm, he willed a ball of flame into existence. "Good, you have seen how your affinity can be used. Practice with it, master it. Your solar affinity will be a great tool for your survival. Now I must rest. Please escape to a safer zone." Danny beamed. He could feel his connection to the very heat and light of the sun itself, like heartburn within his chest, but not painful and filling his whole body. If he had more time, he would explore this further, but he dismissed the ball of flame and set on the path to save his mother. "Thank you for showing me this. I will use it well," he sent back. "I have to save my mother before I can escape." Danny could feel a spike of worry and fear emanating from the dwindling presence within his mind. He started off then, following the path the creature had left for him, hoping that if this was a dream, it wasn't about to turn into a nightmare. Whatever the creature was, It did not move with any kind of regard for covering its tracks, so Danny assumed it must be of low intelligence. Or perhaps it was so powerful it had no need for protection. He shivered and hoped for the former. He recognized many of the typical trees and shrubs, but this didn't feel like the forests he had grown up around. Now and then a plant would catch his attention, unlike any he had ever seen. A plant made of interlocking vines that moved like it was blowing in the wind, shrubs with thorny branches and strange multicolored berries, even a sad-looking tree with dimly glowing leaves. Several times, plants would have a light aura of green or red or blue. When he looked closer at a plant with a green aura, a box titled Wilderness Survival popped up, stating the plant was edible. The fauna was no exception to change either. He passed a handful of squirrels and birds, a couple butterflies, but oddities still made their presence known. He gave a wide berth to a spider as big as his hand that was draining the fluids out of something dark in its web. None of these had any auras, and Danny wondered if it was because they were creatures, or if maybe his skill wasn't high enough to get any good information. Danny hurried, realizing that the warnings the Phoenix had given him must be true. The hair on the back of his neck stuck up, and his adrenaline perked, on even higher alert than he was before. After what seemed like ages, he stopped in his tracks. Ahead of him stood a massive green plant covered in a soft fuzz, much like a Venus flytrap. Surrounding the plant were half a dozen smaller versions of itself, each with a tendril wrapping around the larger plant, entering a slimy orifice. The huge plant's mouth-like structure was closed, with a human-sized lump within it. Chapter 5. "What the hell?" Danny whispered out loud. All the botany and plant-based merit badges he had earned had not prepared him for giant, man-eating plants. He wished he had his machete with him so he could wade in there and hack away, but he didn't have any tools. After a quick scan, he saw a long, broken branch from a nearby tree. It was about as straight as a dog's leg, but it was better than nothing. He shrieked when a tendril wrapped around his ankle and yanked him to the ground. He dropped his makeshift weapon as he was dragged towards one of the smaller plants. Prying at the restraint around his ankle, he did his best to dig his heels in. Wildly grabbing at anything within reach, he found no help as the giant tendril continued to pull him, unaffected by his escape attempts. Danny eyed the plant in his path, its gaping mouth leaves open. This one, like the others surrounding the huge plant, was about the size of a large dog, so he knew it wouldn't be able to eat him on its own. That wasn't very comforting, however, as the rest of the plants detached their tendrils from the huge plant and made their way over to him in a slow and silent death march. The silence of the scene added a level of dread Danny had never experienced. Movies always had monsters making terrible noises as they attacked their prey. It made sense. Plants didn't have vocal cords, but it was eerie in the extreme. Danny yanked on his leg to free himself, but the tendril was stronger than he was and didn't budge. He scrambled in the dirt as he neared his slow demise. He flung a handful of dirt and rocks at the open mouth thing, just as it pulled his leg up and closed around his foot. The dirt and rocks had about as much effect as mean words, and Danny's heart sank while the rest of the plants spat their tendrils at him, catching any part they could and pulling his body taut, as if he were being drawn and quartered. Beyond having parts of him engulfed by plants, the tingling in his foot warned him that something bad was happening. Then those areas started to go numb. At least if he was going to die, it wouldn't be in agony. Danny thrashed and kicked as much as his body would allow when one of the smaller plants wrapped its tendril around his neck and started squeezing. With his head pulled back taut, Danny got to watch as the plant that was choking him made its way closer, its mouth open wide towards his face. He fought for all he was worth, wrenching on the tendrils wrapped around his body, but there were too many, and they were too strong. The mouth petals closed over his face, and he screamed in terror while the toxins entered his skin and began to do their numbing work. "No!" Danny screamed, his voice muffled against the slimy interior of the plant, as the fear threatened to make him lose his mind. He shut his eyes and concentrated, remembering the vision the Phoenix had showed him, of other phoenixes harnessing the solar power of the sun. He pictured his vascular system, the winding maze of arteries and veins, and focused intently on filling them with the energy of the sun. The numbness started to melt out of his body, and he could feel his temperature rise, leaving the pain of plant digestive enzymes behind it. Danny screamed and tensed his muscles as the numbness burned out of his body. Toxins dripped into his mouth from the petals enveloping his head, and he could feel the bile in his throat burning its way up as he gagged on his own mortality. With a heave, he let the burning bile out, a sliver of hope that maybe if he threw up in this plant's mouth, it would dislodge him. Instead, burning hot flames shot out of his mouth like a flamethrower, searing a hole through the meat of the leaf and bringing fresh, sweet air into his lungs. The plant around his head shuddered, losing its ability to grip him, and fell away, leaving only the tendril tightly wrapped around his throat, squeezing the life out of him. Danny was not about to go down now, though, not now that he knew he could breathe fire. He attempted to reproduce the flame shooting out of him, aiming his mouth at the next plant wrapped around his hand. The pain coursing through his body was tremendous as the numbing agent burned away. Danny fought through the pain, refusing to pass out though his head pounded, and eyes begged to close. He focused intently and finally shot another gout of flame from his mouth and burned away the plant attached to his hand. Holding his hand and wiggling his fingers directly in front of his face, he marveled that it had come through the conflagration unscathed. He grasped the tendril around his neck, pulling on it to free himself, as the black spots of suffocation began to seep into his vision. The heat in his body got more intense, and what he had mistaken as burning from the acidic enzymes escaped through his pores and enveloped his whole self. A pleasant warmth suffused his entire body as heat waves emanated from him. Soon his skin started to glow as he called upon his solar affinity and raised his temperature hotter and hotter. His veins danced and his skin tingled with the sensation, like the time he'd snuck into the liquor cabinet and took a swallow of his dad's dark golden whiskey. He opened his eyes and light burst forth from them, his entire body now lit up like a lantern filament. The plants wrapped around him exploded into bursts of sap as their cuticles melted and ruptured. Danny fell to the ground panting, surrounded by the charred husks of the smaller carnivorous creatures. Immature mutated karyophyllales, level 3, slain ×5, plus 1,500 XP. He lay on the forest floor catching his breath, dumbfounded by everything that had just happened. He sat up, brushed himself off, and noticed a flashing notification in the corner of his vision. Beneath that, he saw 3 bars of varied colors, red, blue, and yellow. The bars were all well below half full, and judging by his current state of battered tiredness, he assumed they were a representation of his state of being. He stood up on shaky legs and warily looked around for any more of the smaller plants. Seeing none, he focused his attention on the largest of them. "Okay, you big bastard, it's your turn now." A tendril from its base unfurled and cracked against him like a whip, tearing open the skin on his arm and sending him crashing back down to the ground. Danny learned that the red bar in his eyesight must represent health as it dropped drastically low. Nothing in him wanted to get up again, but he knew lying there was going to get him killed, and he rolled to the side as fast as his body would allow. Willing himself to ignore the pain, Danny attempted to summon the heat energy like before. Another whipping made him lose focus as his health bar dropped to 20%. Desperate, he lunged towards the base of a nearby tree for cover. Rolling behind the trunk, he sucked in ragged gasps of air and tried to calm himself. Slowing his breathing, Danny focused and tried summoning the burning energy again. His skin began to heat up, and an orange glow radiated from his body. Danny stepped from behind the tree, and true to form, the plant whipped its tendril at him. This time, however, Danny leaned into it, raising his arm to block, and gasping as another 5% of his health disappeared. But now he had the upper hand. The tendril had wrapped around his arm, and Danny grabbed it with his free hand, forcing contact and mentally pushing the burning sensation from his arms and hands onto the plant. The plant yanked, pulling Danny off his feet and dragging him towards its base, where a host of shorter tendrils covered in dripping thorns awaited. Danny had only seconds and shoved with all his mental might, his hand and arms erupting in brilliant white light. The tendril around his arm ignited as the blue bar in Danny's vision plummeted. He realized that must represent how much he could use his solar power, and that he didn't have much of that energy left. The plant's tendril waved in the air, trying to cool down. With a roar, Danny summoned the energy again, forcing it out of his mouth in a torrent of heat and hate. The inferno of flame landed at the base of the plant, igniting the writhing, thorny tendrils and causing the plant to stiffen in pain. He watched as his blue bar drained completely and the jet of flame sputtered out, leaving him breathing hard. The plant rocked a final time, and its huge, leafy mouth fell to the ground, opening up and spilling out a body. Elder mutated 𝗕𝗄𝗄𝗁𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂, level 5, slain, plus 650 XP. Danny rushed over to the figure, thankful that his flames had not reached her. It was a woman. Her skin melted in places and charred in others. Patches of her clothes melted away. It was a woman, but it was not his mother. His mother was only in her late 30s, and this woman, while familiar, looked much older. She lay there unmoving. "What?" Danny asked, to no one but himself. "Who is this?" Chapter 6. Danny rolled the older woman onto her back. He tilted her head and opened her mouth, peering inside to ensure there was no plant material blocking her airway. Satisfied, he moved 2 fingers to her neck. He blew out a breath he didn't even realize he was holding when he felt a strong, albeit slow, rhythmic beating. She showed little sign of the trauma, a decent abrasion on her right calf and a hefty bruise around the left ankle, along with some of the burn spots he had noticed earlier. Her white hair was speckled with bits of forest, and her clothes had certainly seen better days. Large holes spotted the floral fabric, barely hanging on to her small frame. She lay there completely still, her chest rising and falling. He needed to get her out of there. Who knew if there were more carnivorous plants lurking in the trees? With a puff of breath, he acknowledged the flashing exclamation mark in his field of vision. "Quest complete. Rescue your mother. Reward, 3,000 XP. Level up. You have reached level 2 as a Phoenix. Stat points automatically distributed. Class points automatically distributed as designated by Symbiont, Phoenix. You have 4 free attribute points. Level up. You have reached level 2 as a Wilderness Scout. No attribute points gained for subclasses. You have 2 free class points to distribute. These class points may only be spent on subclass skills." Danny inhaled as he felt the energy coursing through his body. He couldn't describe what was different, but he felt better than just a few moments before. The flashing exclamation point faded. A glowing plus sign appeared, but he ignored it and focused on the completed quest. His mother? What is going on? Is this some kind of time warp? He had saved the lady, and the system checked off the quest as if it was his mom. Could it really be her? He shook his head to clear his thoughts, and with a sigh squatted down to pick up the strangely familiar woman. He began the trek back to the highway, carrying her in a fireman's lift. He paused about a third of the way back when the yellow bar in his vision depleted to nothing, and he somehow knew he couldn't go on. Blowing his breath out, he swung the woman off his shoulders and laid her down, then plopped onto the ground next to her. Looking at the woman again, it was uncanny how familiar she seemed. Her features were his mom's, only older. His eyes widened and jaw dropped as he noticed her wounds. Most of the burned flesh had the soft pink hue of new skin. The cuts and bruises were simply gone. He marveled at this and wondered how much it had to do with the strange boxes and this system. The day was strange, but perhaps the strangest thing was his overwhelming feeling of déjà vu, like he had experienced this before. A glance at his yellow bar showed it was half full. With a sigh, he looked at the glowing plus sign and thought at it, opening it up. Another box bloomed in front of him, labeled Status Screen. He thought watching a person's wounds close before his eyes was amazing enough, but the sheer amount of data on the screen made him forget to breathe for a moment. Status Screen. Name, Daniel Burns. Race, human, symbiont, male. Class, Phoenix. Level, 2. Titles, none. Health, 100. Mana, 100. Stamina, 100. Status: Alzheimer's, a -10% intelligence, variable, periodic. Dementia, -10% charisma, -10% intelligence, variable, periodic. Attributes: Strength, 15. Constitution, 15. Intelligence, 15, parentheses 14. Charisma, 13, parentheses 12. Agility, 13. Perception, 12. Willpower, 19. Luck, 10. Skills: Wilderness survival, 3. Athletics, 3. Observe, 3. Tracking, 4. First aid, 3. Class skills: Echoes of Past Lives, 1. Rebirth, 1. Spells: None. Unspent primary class attribute points, 4. Unspent subclass skill points, 2. Another plus sign appeared next to the attributes, a way to increase them with the unspent points. He perused the status screen, remembering his time playing tabletop RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons. This reminded him very much of a character sheet, although more advanced. He stopped when he got to the status section, reading the 2 conditions affecting him, Alzheimer's and dementia. Somehow he knew these conditions to be true, albeit alarming. He kicked at the dirt. All these skills, and he gets landed with mental demise? Was this system just a product of a broken brain? What was he forgetting that he didn't even remember he forgot? That would certainly explain the old lady version of his mom and everything else that was so strange today. The skill Echoes of Past Lives caught his attention, and he focused on it to reveal more text. Though others may not believe in your power of rebirth, you will never doubt it. You have memories which may reveal themselves as skills from past lives. The higher this skill, the more you will remember from past lives. Knowledge of system operations will always be preserved. That made sense why he didn't freak out about the boxes or the voice in his head. The woman stirred next to him, snapping him to attention and pushing away all thoughts of character sheets. He cradled her head in his hands, astonished that all her wounds had healed completely. Without the threat of danger, and with a chance to further study her, Danny really saw the familiarity. He brushed his hand along her cheek and patted her shoulder. Mom? Is that really you? She groaned, and her eyes opened. They opened and closed a few times, either adjusting to the light or perhaps to her new surroundings. Her physical wounds may have healed, but the memory of being eaten alive would last a while. She turned her head toward Danny, and her eyes stayed open, big as saucers. No, no, no! Am I dead? Did we die? Tears formed in her eyes, and she reached up to touch Danny's face. Danny, why? What? How are you so young again? She grabbed him and pulled him close, squeezing hard, and he knew for sure it was his mom. What happened to you? What is going on? Danny asked, face smushed in his mother's embrace, his own eyes filling with tears. I was on my eagle hike and woke up here, and everything is different, and you're old, and... He stopped when his mom started laughing. Old? I'm old, she laughed, breaking the somber tone, and soon Danny smiled as well. Danny, I don't know what's going on any more than you do, his mother said. Except that a few hours ago, we both started seeing these boxes filled with text, offering us weird stuff like classes and skills. Before I was grabbed by that thing, you were 48. Now you don't look any older than 18, and I am just as confused about everything as you are. Danny stood up and offered his hand, which she took and got to her feet. This is a really weird day. You can see these boxes too? She nodded. Yes, though we haven't really had much time to talk about it. I guess aliens are taking over or something. She looked around. I thought I was going crazy at first, but then those plant things... Well, I don't know what to think anymore. Susan frowned and rubbed her eyes, a gesture Danny recognized as frustration, having seen it enough growing up. Well, whatever is happening, we're in this together, and we need to find safety somehow. Where's your car? Danny said. Should be right at the road, But the car doesn't work, Danny. Nothing works anymore, she said, looking at him. The sight of him amazed her, looking just as he had all those years ago. I just wish I knew what was going on. She touched his hand. Especially with you. How are you so young? Do you remember anything else? When did this happen? Danny shook his head violently, and Susan recognized the sudden movement as one he had adopted as the dementia had gotten worse. No, Danny said. I don't know. I remember a voice in my head. I somehow just know things that I feel like I remember. But I just don't. He shook his head again. I don't remember. Susan embraced him, recognizing the signs of a breakdown. She rubbed his back, talking in a slow, sure voice. Shh, it's okay. It's okay. You don't have to remember. She took a deep breath and squared her shoulders, ending the embrace. Come on, let's get to the car and see if we can find help. She grasped her son's hand, set her jaw, and started walking. Chapter 7. They traveled much faster now that they were both able to walk. During their travel, they talked, Susan filling him in on his current life, and Danny filling her with nostalgia. Danny experienced that feeling of déjà vu he recognized as the echoes of past lives skill. He knew his mom's words to be accurate, although he had a hard time believing he had a wife and child. Despite not actually knowing them, he knew he would have to save them. He turned to his mom to ask her what their next step should be, only to stop as he caught her staring at him. Susan blushed, averting her eyes. I'm sorry, it's just so uncanny. You really are so young. It's like I jumped back in time 30 years. Danny shrugged. I don't know what's going on. I think it's this rebirth skill I have. It says it changes me when I use it or something. How do you know that? Susan asked. It came up on one of those boxes when I woke up on the ground. It also says it on my status screen. Your what? She looked at him confused. That's the second time you've mentioned that. What is it? My status screen? It's like a character sheet from the RPGs I used to play. That game with the dice? Danny chuckled. His mom had never got that game with the dice, but had still been nice enough to provide snacks and a place to host it for those weekends when he and his friends played. Yeah, Mom, that one. Think about looking at your info and say, status. Susan's mouth popped open in shock as she began to read her status information. What? How? How does it know all this? Something she saw on her screen made her face screw up, and her eyes began to water again. Danny, how accurate is this? Danny shrugged. I don't know. I mean, it told me about my Alzheimer's and dementia that I didn't even know myself. Or, well, I did, but I didn't know that I knew. You know what I mean? He shook his head as if trying to make his words make sense. Why? What does yours say? Susan's face turned, lit up, and her happy demeanor seemed to radiate out of her. The woman Danny saw before him looked broken and tired, but she had a resolution that was contagious. Susan took a deep breath, a tear rolling down her face, as a huge, genuine smile erupted. Danny stopped walking and reached out to touch her arm. Mom, what did it say? He asked again. She looked at him, her smile wide as she met his eyes. It's nothing. Just what? She held out her hand to him, and he observed as she flexed her fingers, the knuckles that had been bulging and swollen with arthritis, now smooth. Nothing. My arthritis is just gone now, I guess. You live with something for so long, and it starts to become a piece of you. Then, when it's gone, even if you feel better, you kind of miss it. She turned away, and he felt like there might have been something more, but decided not to press the issue further. We need to move faster, Susan said. We have to find Monica and Jason. They finally exited the thick line of trees, and in another 10 yards over sparse grass and random litter, the freeway stretched across the landscape. Which way do we go? Dan asked. Susan pointed north up I-5. We only made it a few miles out of Lakehead. It's a bit of a walk, But at least we know we won't get run over." She gave a nervous chuckle at her dark joke. "Should we get going then?" Danny planted his feet toward the sun and held his hand out toward the horizon. He moved his hand slowly toward the sun, stopping when his pointer finger met it. "Looks like we've got plenty of daylight. Let's not waste any of it." Susan smiled. "Okay, let's go." As they made their way north, Danny asked, "What class did you pick anyway? Is it anything that could help us get there faster?" His mom smirked at him. "Oh, I don't think so. There were a few options that were so weird sounding. Anything goes, okonomiyaki master, or magical chef. I was looking at one called gastromancer when I was grabbed, and I accidentally selected it. I think it's some kind of food wizard. But I have to tell you, Danny, I don't get all this weird computer stuff. You know me and technology. I can't even figure out the DVR box." Danny stopped walking. "Your what? What's a DVR box?" "I don't really even know," she said. They laughed and started walking, following along the shoulder of the large road. "Where did you get that outfit anyway?" Susan asked. Danny told her about his perks, and they continued to share what little they knew about the system while they walked. At some point, Danny opened a sheet and wondered where to assign his free attribute points. After careful consideration, he put half into strength and half into constitution. He could tell his class was designed to focus on willpower and intelligence, but his last experience attempting to carry his mom showed him he needed to increase his physical stats to maximize how much help he could be. He left his skill points alone, not wanting to make a rash decision. He just hoped he wasn't making a mistake. Danny and his mom had figured out a walking pace that kept them moving quickly while keeping their stamina at equilibrium. Susan seemed to have a never-ending supply of snacks, candies, and treats in her bag, which she kept offering to Danny. He smirked as he munched on the things she gently forced on him. Their jovial mood soured eventually when they came across a car that had driven off the road and crashed headlong into a tree. They rushed over to check the driver, but found him dead several yards in front of the car, having been propelled through the windshield. Susan cried at the sight of the poor broken man, and Danny put an arm around his mom in a comforting hug and pulled her away so they could continue their trek. He briefly considered the fact that gruesome death would probably be a much common event in this new world, but shook his head, not wanting to borrow worry. They passed other cars, abandoned on the side of the road like theirs, the occupants nowhere to be seen. With only about a mile to go, they came to the section of road that went over the waters of the Sacramento River arm of Lake Shasta. Ahead of them was a pileup of several cars, smashed hunks of metal and broken glass. A large fuel truck looked to have lost control and tipped over, blocking part of the southbound lanes and half the northbound. Thankfully, the massive multi-thousand-gallon fuel tank had not ruptured. The southbound lanes had a couple vehicles that looked like they had played bumper cars and lost control, crashing into the guardrail. Behind the semi was another car, a sedan that had rear-ended the truck, crumpling like an aluminum can. Without hesitation, they ran up to the vehicles to look for survivors. Danny pulled up short when he detected no movement, then noticed trails of blood leading toward the edge of the bridge. He followed a trail to find blood splatters over the guardrail. With a tremor in his voice, he shouted out to his mom, "It looks like there might have been survivors here, but something dragged them into the water." "Stay away from the water, then," she shouted back. He jumped back from the edge, taking her advice. "Let's get around this. The southern edge of town is close. Hopefully it'll be safer there." They moved toward the wreckage and threaded their way through the vehicles. A Subaru laying on its side caught Danny's attention. "Mom, come give me a hand here. I found a couple bikes on the rack of this car." "It's been years since I've ridden a bike," Susan said, helping unfasten them. "No worries, Mom. I hear it's just like riding a bike." She paused at his lame attempt at humor and gave him a raised eyebrow. She opened her mouth to retort, but her words changed into a scream as her eyes widened at something behind Danny. Chapter 8. Danny whirled to see what his mom was screaming at. A shiver went down his spine at what he saw. Climbing over the guardrail was a humanoid with giant, unblinking eyes. Its skin was a tough-looking, scaly black, its mouth full of needle-sharp teeth, and its hands and feet ended in webbed claws. A strap wrapped around its chest held a spear. Fear spurred Danny's actions, and he worked faster to detach the bikes. He considered running, but knew the bikes would be much faster. Susan was frozen, unable to tear her eyes away from the creature. "It's real. There really are aliens," she whispered as her face paled. "Mom, snap out of it. We've got to go." Danny pushed her on the shoulder while he untangled one bike and set it to the side. The creature, now on the bridge, yelled something at them and leveled its spear. Danny ignored it, ripping the other bike free from the rack. The creature made another terrifying noise and stalked toward them. Danny grabbed his mom and shoved the handlebar of a bike in her hand. "Go, Mom! Get to the town. I'll distract it." She grabbed the handlebar more out of reflex than a desire to obey. "Danny, no!" she gasped as the creature raised its spear to throw. "Don't argue with me, damn it!" he shouted at her. He could use his new powers, and she was way more likely to get hurt than he was. Why wouldn't she just listen? Danny grimaced, his features contorting into an angry look. His mother's face snapped around to look at his. In that instant, he saw something within her, something that said she understood, or at least had experienced that anger before. She got on the bike and shoved off, wobbly at first, but picking up speed. The creature shouted more words in its garbled language and pointed at Susan as she pedaled away. "Hey, fish face! Ignore her!" Danny shouted. He had no idea if the thing could understand him. He searched, grabbing and throwing the first thing he could find, a bike pump, hitting the thing in its chest. The creature turned to him, its spear still raised. Why hadn't the thing thrown it? Was it just an intimidation tactic? He must have guessed right as the creature put the spear back into its strap and pulled something out of a belt pouch around its waist. A tangle of braided rope attached to a few spheres. A weighted net. It had put away its weapon and brought out something to capture with. Danny didn't know what was worse, knowing that this thing was what had taken the people from the car crash, or that it wanted them, and him, alive. He looked down the road to see his mother riding into the distance and prayed that she would make it. Danny wished he had run. The creature wound up and threw the net with unerring accuracy. He tried to dodge, but was too slow. His stomach sank as the net wrapped around him, the weights wrapping tightly like bolas, and he was dragged to the ground. The smell of dead fish assaulted his nose as he struggled to free himself. As the creature approached, it was obvious it wasn't made to walk on land. Its webbed feet were long and floppy like scuba fins, causing it to move with a strange, slow gait. Danny waited, biding his time for the creature to come closer. He sought the solar energy contained within him and pulled it close to the surface of his skin. It felt easier this time, like a natural reflex to his spiked adrenaline. As the creature reached him, it warbled in its strange language and grabbed an end of the net, dragging it and Danny along the pavement towards the guardrail of the bridge. He dug his fingers into the ground, grasping at anything to stop him, his breath coming in shortened gasps. With bloodied nails, panic was setting in. He couldn't focus, and he felt the solar heat retreating from his skin. He had to do something. This couldn't end now. It wasn't his time. He refocused, channeling his fear into his solar affinity. With its back turned to him, Danny forced the solar energy up towards his mouth again and spat at its captor's back in a blazing inferno. He couldn't tell if it would hurt the thing or not, and was pleasantly surprised when it hit, burning through the creature's clothes and the harness holding its spear. The scream it made when the flames touched its skin was unearthly, and Danny watched as its flesh burned and flaked off as if it was sandblasted away. The creature fell to the ground, rolling and screaming in agony. Danny used the remainder of his blue energy bar to blast the solar power out of his skin through his pores, incinerating the net holding him. As the ashes blew away in the wind, He got up to run when the creature's hand closed on his foot. Danny could do nothing to get free from its vice-like grip. His blue energy bar had not recovered enough to use his solar power again, and he desperately searched for anything to help him. The creature was still howling in pain, its flesh flaking off in huge chunks, like unsecured newspaper in a campfire. Danny noticed its spear then, laying on the ground next to him where it had fallen when the harness burned off. He snatched it up with as much skill as someone who had never held a spear before, and stabbed it down on the creature's wrist. It screamed again and reflexively released Danny and fumbled at its belt. Danny wasted no time, and with the spear in hand, ran and mounted the bike he had freed. He pedaled for all he was worth, holding the spear across the handlebars. As he put distance between himself and the sea monster, he heard a loud bleeding noise, and the waters all around the bridge started to churn. He turned his head to find the source, and saw it blowing a large conch horn. He pushed his bike faster, his calves burning with the effort. He sped down the road, only just avoiding the massive sucker-covered tentacle that leaped out of the water toward him. "Holy crap, what is that thing?" he shouted out loud, riding as hard as he could to get away and off the bridge. He glanced back to see 2 more of the fish creatures climbing the guardrails. He was thankful they were slow on land, and was just starting to feel relieved at the distance he was putting between them, when the huge tentacle picked up one of the smashed cars on the road and threw it at him. He wouldn't have believed his eyes if he didn't have to avoid the car flying towards him. He wasn't sure his heart had ever beat so fast. He screamed as the car slammed into the asphalt a good 10 feet to his side, the cacophony as it scraped across the ground making his whole body flinch. A last glance back showed the creatures across the bridge hollering in his direction, raising their spears. He put on speed and hoped he could find his mother. Chapter 9. Danny pedaled hard, sweat breaking out on his forehead, eyes peeled for any sight of his mom. A movement to his side caught his attention, sending his elevated heart rate up even higher. He breathed a sigh of relief when he saw it was his mother, who had hidden behind a dead car on the side of the road. He slowed down, but then motioned for her to hurry up. "Why did you stop? We need to keep moving," he yell-whispered, no idea what other monsters might be lingering nearby. She jumped on her bike and rode up to him. "I was just watching to see what was happening. I couldn't leave you behind. Danny, you can't scare me like that. You could have died. What were those things?" "I don't know what they were, but I think they wanted me alive, which scares me more than if they had tried to kill me." Her eyes filled with tears, but then a look of anger crossed her face. "Don't you ever tell me to leave you like that again. You can't do that to a mother. Tell her to leave her son to die." Danny wanted to console her somehow, but only had words to offer. "I'm sorry, I have powers now that can help me, and I knew I might stand a chance to get away. I needed you to go try and save Monica and Jason." "I know, I'm just so sick of this damn world. The things we have had to go through since your diagnosis. Then this alien invasion, or whatever it is. It's just so much." "I know, Mom, I'm sorry. I don't know what it's been like since the diagnosis. But this world with its strange monsters attacking us, it's a lot. I love you, though, and I will do everything I can to protect you." They rode in silence for a bit after that. "Powers? What do you mean you've got powers?" she asked. He smiled, thinking of the energy he could summon. "It's like fire powers. It's from something called an elemental affinity. I guess I have a connection to solar energy. I don't know exactly what that means, but I've been able to create a lot of fire out of my mouth and body. It's pretty neat, actually." She looked at him askance. "You breathe fire, and it's pretty neat?" she asked. He barked a short laugh. "Yeah, I guess that's a bit of an understatement." "We're getting close now." Susan pointed toward the green sign that read, "Welcome to Lakehead," and "Population 430. "Wow, this is a real small town," Danny said. "It's where you retired from firefighting. You love the small town and river here," Susan said. Danny shook his head, trying to remember the things she was talking about. He had that weird déjà vu feeling again as they rode. He felt like he knew everywhere they passed. He was pretty sure if he closed his eyes, his body would take him back home. They rode through the small town, taking a few side streets. "Where are all the people?" he asked. "I don't know. With the cars not working, maybe they're just in their houses?" Susan responded. They rode until they got to a large, red, 2-story house with a detached garage that had been converted into a mother-in-law apartment. Susan pulled into the empty spot of the driveway with Danny right behind her. They dismounted, and his mom waved her hand towards the house. "This is it," Susan said, and pointed at the Tahoe in the driveway. "Monica's car is still here. I don't see Jason's, though." "Jason has a car? How old is he?" Danny asked. Susan blinked at him, her smile melting into a frown. "You really don't remember?" Danny felt the heat rise in his face as he lashed out. "How the hell am I supposed to remember? As far as I know, it's still 1987, he screamed. Susan only stared at Danny as he panted, his face red. She turned her whole body towards him, keeping her hands behind her back. She spoke in a calm, tempered voice. "I'm sorry, Danny. I know this is hard for you." She slowly approached him from his right side and placed an arm on his bicep. "Would you like to go in?" Danny shook his head, not in response to the question, but to clear the anger away as he absorbed his mom's soft demeanor. "Yeah, let's go inside," he said. Susan turned, walking towards the door on the side of the house. She took her keys from her pocket, fumbled with them a bit, and pushed one into the lock of the door. As it was opening, a weight slammed against it, shoving it closed again. Susan jumped back, startled, and tried turning the knob again, only to find it was locked. "Who is it? What do you want?" came a female voice from inside. "Monica? Monica, it's me, Susan. Open the door," Danny's mom yelled. "Susan? Who's that with you?" the voice, presumably Monica, said. It's a long story. But this is Danny," Susan said, her hand pressed against the door. It was quiet for a long moment. "Monica, it's really me. What's going on?" "Prove it," Monica said. "What? Prove what? Monica, what is going on? Why won't you let me in? Prove that you are who you say you are. Prove that you're Susan. I don't know that guy with you, and Susan left town hours ago. How do I know you're who you say you are?" Monica's voice sounded strained, like she was trying to shove all the emotion out of it but failing. Susan stared at the door, then looked at Danny, who simply shrugged. "All right," she said. "I was at your wedding and tried to calm your ass of a father down. When I called him a drunken idiot, he threw his drink at me and stomped off. I thought you would never forgive me." Susan was just about to say something else to break the long silence that followed, when the lock clicked and the door opened. A petite brunette in her 40s stood behind the door, and Danny felt a wave of unexplainable emotion looking at her. He couldn't recognize her, but something within him felt he should. "Susan?" the woman said, and rushed out to embrace the older woman, dropping a large knife. "Susan, it is you! Where's Dan? So much is going on." Monica stopped and looked warily up and down the street, biting her lower lip. "Come in. You have to come in. We need to lock the doors." Monica ushered the two of them in the house, her movements frantic as she scooped the knife back up and deadbolted the door behind them. She pressed her back against the door, breathing hard. "Quickly, come this way. We have to help him." She pointed at Danny. "If you want him to live," Monica said, and walked through the kitchen toward what looked like the living room. "Monica, you need to slow down and tell me what's going on," Susan called behind her as she followed. Danny scanned the kitchen, the sense of déjà vu overwhelming him, and went after the two women. He picked up his pace when he heard his mother gasp. "My God, Monica!" Susan exclaimed, her hand over her mouth. Danny rounded the corner to see a boy, no, a young man, tied to a chair with earmuffs over his ears and a gag of cloth tied around his mouth. "What have you done to Jason?" Chapter 10. Susan moved to help the young man, Jason, out of his bindings when Monica grabbed her arm. "Don't!" she yelled. Then her eyes darted toward the door they had just entered from. In a lowered voice, she said, "This is for his own good. It's protecting him. Something weird is going on. Something that has all the men in town freaking out. If you don't want your friend here," she pointed to Danny, "to suffer the same fate, we need to do the same to him." "Does it have to do with the boxes and this new system that seems to have taken over?" Danny asked. He felt strange looking at her and the young man in the chair. He felt protective over them, but didn't know why. It must have had to do with his memories of past lives skill. Monica looked at him, an eyebrow cocked. Her face screwed up as she did a double-take between the man in the chair and Danny. "Susan, who is this? What happened to Dan?" Susan put her hand on Danny's shoulder. "We've had a strange day as well. This is Dan. This system changed him." Monica took Danny in, her eyes going from top to bottom and back to his face. "What are you talking about?" Danny nodded towards her. "It's true, I am Dan. Or, well, I go by Danny. I don't remember you. I'm sorry." Monica tensed up, a war of conflicting emotions making their way across her face. "You don't remember me." "He can't remember anything past his teenager years," Susan said. "The system took over and our car died on the way to the doctor. Dan was still Dan then. But then I was almost eaten by some plant monster, and he saved me, looking like this. I've spent a lot of time with him, and I can assure you it is Dan." Monica looked right at Danny, her stare piercing into his eyes. She squinted, cocking her head in different directions. How is this even possible?" she asked. "It's the system. I became something called a phoenix, like the one from the story, I guess. Although the stories never mentioned voices in your head," Danny said. "I guess I have a skill called rebirth that changes me based on whatever memories are dominant. When I accepted the class, the system assigned me a rebirth, and I woke up like this." He shrugged, waving his hands over his body. Tears filled Monica's eyes, and she embraced Danny, her head on his shoulder leaving wet stains. Danny wrapped his arms around her, his hands falling comfortably at her waist. His body knew hers. Just as he was about to say something, a strange sound caught his attention. "What is that noise?" he asked. Monica pushed away, her face going white. She looked to Susan. "Get him in a chair. I'll try to find more rope." "Is that singing?" Danny said, looking around for the source of the noise. "What are you talking about, Monica?" Susan said at the same time. "I know it's hard to believe this is Dan, but—" Monica cut her off. "It's not that. The sound. We have to block out the sound." She grabbed 2 throw pillows and pressed them to the sides of Danny's head, covering his ears. "It is singing," Danny said, pulling at the pillows. "What are you talking about? I don't hear anything," Susan said. "I don't hear it either, but all the men seem to. Now help me," Monica shouted. But it was too late. Danny wrestled the pillows away, enraptured by the sounds he was hearing. The women attempted to recover his ears, to hold him back as he started walking towards the door. "No!" Monica screamed, and moved in front of him, both hands on his chest, pushing him back. Danny felt the heat of anger well up within him, and he slapped Monica's hands away. She yelled in pain as his suddenly hot skin burned her. Danny kept walking towards the door, each step slow but determined. "That music is so beautiful," he whispered, as his anger dissipated along with the rising heat of his body. Tears flowed down Monica's face, and she turned to Susan. "We have to get Jason out of here. If he hears it, he'll be lost too." Danny shouted, making the women jump. "Hello? Who's singing?" He ran to the door and flung it open. Outside was a creature with the legs of a bird, a feather-covered torso, and the head of a woman. It opened its mouth as if it were singing. "So beautiful," Danny said, as his jaw went slack, and he stood by the open door, fascinated as the creature made its way into the house, followed by 3 of the strange humanoid fish people they had seen on the bridge. The 3 figures plodded in, clearly uncomfortable as they walked on their long, webbed feet. "We have to save Jason," Monica whispered under her breath. eyes red and cheeks wet with tears. "What do we do?" Susan asked. "What is that?" She jumped to move when one of the fishmen leapt at her, knocking her to the ground. Monica screamed and raced to the room where Jason was, only to be slammed to the ground as a weighted net wrapped around her. Danny stood there, half aware of everything going on, but so enraptured by the singing, he was unable to pull himself away to act. Monica continued to scream, fighting and kicking with all she had, as the fishman hoisted and carried her on its shoulder outside, the net dragging behind them, its gills flared. Another fish creature pulled out a spear like the one Danny had taken and leveled it at Susan, motioning towards the door, while the final one moved past everyone toward Jason while he was struggling to get free of his restraints. Jason fought until the fishman removed his headphones. Instantly he froze, turning his head towards the door and the bird-like woman beside it. The fishman next to Jason cut his bonds, and the young man walked up to the bird woman, who led both men out of the house. On the road before them was a strange conveyance, a floating cube of water held together by fields of energy. The water moved and splashed, but did not fall from its invisible walls. Several more fishmen were swimming within it, with one at the front wrapped in seaweed like vines. As Susan and Monica were brought closer to the cube, a metal platform extended from the bottom. The women cried out as they were thrown onto it. One fishman tied Susan's wrists and arms together and signaled to the other in the water. The creature wrapped in seaweed pulled a few strands. The cube levitated and started to glide down the street. The fishmen climbed their way back into the tank, seeming relieved to no longer rely on their ineffective feet. Behind the women, Danny watched in mute fascination, mentally fighting against the bonds of the song as they made their way down the streets toward the marina. His mom and supposed wife screamed as electricity suddenly raked across their skin. One of the fishmen swam close to their station on the platform, its head bobbing in what could only be laughter as it pulled one of the seaweed strands, and another shock burned across them. They rode like this until they reached the marina. Every time one of the women would move or speak, they were shocked. The alien parade came to a halt when they reached the marina. What must have been at least half of the town's inhabitants were there, the women strewn together in nets. The men were standing at rapt attention, willing prisoners of two other bird-like women, mouths open wide in song. Water sloshed as the tank sat down, and the bird woman brought Jason and Danny to the rest of the men. Two of the fish people in the conveyance propelled themselves through the water like dolphins and leaped onto the ground, while the pilot of the strange contraption pulled a vine. The floating fish tank began hovering again and turned towards the boat launch, where the energy dissipated and the tank water assimilated into the lake. One of the fishmen brought his mouth to the ear of the bird woman who had led Danny and gestured toward him. She then pulled him from the group toward the fishman. Danny saw that its clothes were burned through, the flesh underneath new and healed. This had been the one he had burned on the bridge. His shock at seeing it completely undamaged turned to dismay as it picked up the spear Danny had stolen and cracked him in the face, knocking him to the ground, blood spraying out of his mouth. Danny gasped in pain and felt the hold on his mind lessen a bit from the act of violence, only to have the singing take control a heartbeat later. "Stop it! Leave him alone!" Susan shouted while she flailed in her net and Monica covered her face in her hands and screamed next to her. The creature looked at them and chuckled in pleasure. Two other fishmen grabbed hold of their nets and dragged them to the center of the parking lot leading toward the boat launch, where a large, round stone dais sat. The parking lot had always been there, but the dais was a new addition. In the center of the platform was a table or altar, engraved with sharks. Their captors roughly threw them down and, using stakes, drove the nets into the ground, digging into the flesh of the helpless women. The lead fishman picked Danny up by the throat and carried him to the altar. The rest of the fishmen stood to either side of him and began chanting. They held Danny's arms and legs as the leader pulled out a vicious, wavy dagger and held it in the air, shouting out what must have been a prayer in a strange language. The singing subsided, and Danny's eyes darted around wildly as the power controlling his body suddenly dropped away, and he shook his head violently as if to dispel what he saw. Monica, unable to take her eyes off the scene, recognized that headshake as the one her husband picked up when he started to lose his mind to dementia. "It really is him," she whispered, her voice rising in pitch to a scream as the leader of the fishmen leveled its dagger and plunged it toward Danny's heart. As the blade descended, a message box appeared in Danny's vision. "Mortal danger imminent. Would you like to activate rebirth? Yes, no." Without hesitation, Danny selected yes. Chapter 11. That scream. Burns recognized that scream. Memories poured into his mind like smoke, images burning their way into his retinas. He knew that scream. It was the same scream he had heard that night in the Jones fire. He had saved a woman, Monica, he remembered, following the screams to a home and pulling out a woman trapped by a fallen bookshelf. It was later he learned her name was Monica. He struggled to remember more and felt like he was trying to grab the smoke in his mind. With a shout, he woke, jerking up. Burns looked around, his eyebrows scrunched down. He appeared to be at the marina in Lakehead. He had been there many times to go fishing, but something was off this time. It might have been the embossed stone slab he was lying on, or maybe it was the corpses surrounding it. 3 bodies around the slab, blackened and charred. Looking closer, he noticed that all 3 of them only had a vaguely human shape. A couple seemed to have fins, and the other had singed feathers strewn about. He shook his head, trying to piece together what was going on. He wasn't concerned, even though charred, freaky alien bodies were all around him. A system message popped into his vision. "Congratulations, you have completed your first true rebirth. Warning, you must gain a level in your base Phoenix class before you may use the skill again. Congratulations, you have learned the skill Rebirth Fluctuation. Your stats fluctuate between rebirths to accommodate your current rebirth subclass." Burns brought up his status screen. Status screen. Name, Daniel Burns. Race, human, symbiont, male. Class, Phoenix 2. Subclass, Pyromancer 1. Titles, none. Health, 170. Mana, 160. Stamina, 170. Status, Alzheimer's, a minus 10% intelligence, variable, periodic. Dementia, minus 10% charisma, minus 10% intelligence, variable, periodic. Attributes, strength, 17. Constitution, 17. Intelligence, 16 parentheses 15. Charisma, 16 parentheses 15. Agility, 15. Perception, 12. Willpower, 22. Luck, 10. Skills, Wilderness Survival, 3. Athletics, 3. Observe, 3. Tracking, 4. First Aid, 3. Flame Burst, 3. Class Skills, Echoes of Past Lives, 1. Rebirth, 1. Spells, none. A pyromancer? Was that a wizard or something? He felt like all of this should be alien to him, but accessing the system was natural somehow. "A rebirth already?" the Phoenix asked him. Burns looked down at himself. "I must have had to for some reason. What happens to me when I go through rebirth anyway?" "What happens to you is different than what happens to a true Phoenix. The system can only copy our abilities. You become phase-shifted for a period of time while the system scans your last mental state to determine your next state of being." Phase-shifted? What's that? "You become invisible and undetectable to normal and magical means, and may pass through solid objects." Burns cocked an eyebrow. "I become a ghost?" Burns got to experience the unique feeling of an inhabitant in his mind rolling its eyes. "Have you at least made it to a safe zone yet?" With those words, his quest log opened, and the quest Get Somewhere Safe highlighted. Burns shrugged, not knowing how to answer the Phoenix. "I'm in Lakeland, at the marina. I'm on a—" He looked down to get a better inspection of the stone slab. "An altar of some kind?" "An altar? New dungeon worlds always get the worst crowd. 𝗏𝗏 is in the opposite direction of where you need to go. You are headed into more dangerous territory. You must turn back. Yeah, well, I really don't know why I'm even here. Burns shook his head, trying to jog his memory. There has to be a reason. I've always liked it here. It's where I thought I would retire. That may be. However, it is no longer a zone that is safe. You must make it out. If you die, I will be trapped here forever, or worse. Then help me. Help me remember why I came here. I cannot. I cannot see into your mind, or at least not into the mind of your past self. You will never be the same any longer, such is the plight of those of the Phoenix. To be reborn over and over, but never fully remembering who you were from one life to the next. Burns grunted, looking at his status screen again. There had to be a reason he was here in 𝗏𝗏. With a sigh, he sat down and gave serious thought to what he was trying to remember. He closed his eyes, and memories of that scream came to him. Burns shook his head violently, trying to force the memories to make sense. After a moment, he caught his breath, and his mind started to clear. I think I'm here to save my girlfriend. And someone else. An older woman? If such is the case, you must act with speed. It is imperative you escape the zone into a safer area, and quickly. The longer you wait, the more dangerous it becomes. Tell me, does the altar have any markings? Burns scrubbed the soot off the stone. Yeah, it looks like embossed reliefs of a huge shark or something. My memories showed me weird fish things, and there are some bodies around me that look like them. Wait, why are there burned bodies around me anyway? If you select a rebirth while you are in danger, you'll experience a fiery rebirth, exploding out in flames that deal fire and holy damage. You become incorporeal during the time of your memory reconstruction. The creatures you burned are most likely 𝗕𝗏𝗁, water people that live only to sacrifice sentience to their warped shark god. Shark god? That's a thing? It is a being like any other, though with a powerful class that is tied to its people's religion. Burns shook his head. Shark gods were almost too much to handle. How powerful is the explosion I cause? I assure you it is quite powerful, though that is not the only reason for the death you caused. The 𝗕𝗏𝗁 are water-based, and thus many of them are very weak to fire, as well as holy damage. What about this feathered human thing? Most likely those are sirens. They often work with the 𝗕𝗏𝗁. Be cautious if there are sirens about. You are in much danger for being male. Their song can enthrall you. Those words sparked another memory in Burns's mind, of a song so beautiful he wanted nothing more than to listen to it forever. Yeah, I think I may have experienced that already, he said. The sirens are also weak to fire and holy attacks, though many of them have gear to mitigate that. If you have killed several with your rebirth, it is likely that they are lower level. They are never alone, though, and I would hazard to say that the 𝗕𝗏𝗁 have most likely bought some territory on this world. I must leave now. I get stronger as you do, but am still so very weak. I will leave you with this. Your memories may be lost, but your soul recognizes your past. Trust your instincts. Now go, get to safety. Burns felt the presence leave his mind, and took a deep breath, checking himself over. He wore his standard firefighter's uniform, navy slacks, and a shirt with a crimson collar, embroidered with SLFD on the pocket. Trust my instincts, he mumbled to himself. He stood up and stretched, wondering what he was going to do now. He closed his eyes and thought about it, memories of that scream coming back to him. Monica. I have to save Monica. But where is she? Why is she here in 𝗏𝗏𝗁? He clenched his eyes shut, remembering. They had spent plenty of time together in the area, out on his boat, fishing and enjoying the river. A smile fluttered across his lips, and he felt a slight tugging in his mind. Opening his eyes, he looked towards the small town and stepped off the dais in the direction he felt pulled to go. Chapter 12. Burns walked through town. He saw cars in designs he didn't recognize, but with just a small shake of his head, he chalked it up to his memory and rebirth. What surprised him was how empty the town was. Lakehead was not big, capping out at around 400-ish population, but normally he would see some people out doing normal things, mowing their lawns, walking dogs, or driving around. He supposed today wasn't a normal day, with the Nagashiu and sirens in the town, but still it bothered him how empty it was. He came up to the house he was feeling pulled to, the front door striking a chord of deep déjà vu. He walked up to the door to find it locked. Hesitating a moment, he closed his eyes and shook his head, trying to remember. A wide grin spread across his face, and he reached for the potted plant on the ground next to the door, lifted the plastic pot within the ceramic to find a house key underneath it. He unlocked the door and went in, and it felt like coming home. As soon as he entered the kitchen, his mouth dropped. Drawers and cabinet doors were left open, food left on the counter. Even the refrigerator door was open. He looked inside the fridge, moving things around in the darkness of its unlit bulb. The lukewarm beer called to Burns. He popped the top on one and sipped the beverage as he continued his tour through the house. On the otherwise empty dining room table was a framed picture with a note beside it. He set his beer down to look at the picture, and a sob tore out of him. In the picture was a man he knew to be himself, though older, with Monica. The years had been kind to her, and though he had roughened with age, her loveliness had only increased. There was a young man in the picture with them, in his late teens. Burns's heart accelerated as he examined the young man. He didn't know his name, but he knew it was his son. He popped the picture out of the frame and folded it into his breast pocket. They were the reason he was here in Lakehead, instead of finding safety in a lower-level zone. He picked up the note next, recognizing the cursive handwriting as his mother's. Danny, I don't know if you will find this note or not, but I felt I had to leave it just in case. I've explained to Monica, your wife, and Jason, your son, about your rebirth thing, as best I can anyway. She thinks I'm crazy, but it was the only thing that gave Monica enough hope to snap out of the shock of watching you die right in front of us. When that blade came, she thought you were dead for good. But when your body turned white hot and exploded out with heat and light, burning those horrible creatures, I knew you would be back. I hope you would be back. Several of the creatures died in the explosion, and the rest ran off. We've gathered together, the whole town, and are going to Shasta Lake. You would be so proud of Jason. He seems to understand this system much better than the rest of us. He kept referencing video games and ended up getting us organized and even figured out who could be effective in battle. I hope it doesn't come to that. I told him what happened to us on the bridge, but he says we'll be able to figure something out. I told the town that these creatures would return, and everything you told me the Phoenix said about getting somewhere safe. I think everyone is in shock over how easily we were all captured, and want to get out of the city as fast as possible. Many people have loved ones there anyway and wanted to get back to them. If you find this note, please come south and meet up with us. We left a bike in the garage for you. I love you. We love you. Mom. Burns folded up the note, putting it in the same pocket as the picture. He took a deep breath, shook his head, and walked to the garage. A quick glance outside showed him that the sun was nearing the western horizon. He had once known a trick to telling time just by looking at the sun's position, but couldn't quite remember how to do it. Regardless, he knew by the length of the shadows it was getting late in the day, and he didn't have too many hours of daylight left. He hopped on the bike and took off towards the highway. He rode in the center of the lane, pedaling as fast as he could. Burns didn't know how long they had left on their trek, but he hoped he'd catch up with them. He kept an eye on his stamina and noticed riding the bike seemed very efficient in terms of stamina use versus speed, and found a rhythm that kept him pedaling consistently, while not expending more stamina than he regenerated. He hadn't been riding long when he saw the bridge ahead of him, with a swath of people, maybe half the town, looking like a ragged group of gypsies. They had bikes with bike carts interspersed throughout, but most of the people were on foot, pulling wagons and wearing backpacks. Burns rode through the crowd, making his way to the front, where he recognized the young man, Jason, directing people. "Look," Jason said to a group of older men and women as he pointed to a car laying on its side. "These circles? They look like sucker prints to me. I think this is pretty good evidence of what my grandma was talking about." "Hey kid, I get that you might think so, but why the hell are aliens going to bring giant squids or whatever to live in our lake? I'm not saying she's lying, but it's been a crazy day. Maybe she's just mistaken," said an older man in checked flannel and blue jeans with a rifle strapped to his back. "I'm right here, you know. I can hear you," Susan said, her eyes steely. "What I saw was not a hallucination. Don't confuse my kindness for stupidity." She cut off as she noticed Burns riding up. "Danny!" she shouted and ran towards him. Jason looked at the man on the bike, recognition dawning on him. "No way. It's actually real." Jason ran to Burns and grabbed onto him. "Dad? Is that you?" Burns let the young man hold him for a moment, then gently pried them both off. "Mom, you haven't called me Danny in years." He looked at the young man, recognizing him from the picture in his pocket. "You must be Jason. I'm sorry, I don't remember." Jason pulled back, the delight on his face fading. Yeah. Grandma told me you might not. I'm sure it would hurt a lot more if it hadn't happened before." He tapped on the side of Burns's head. "I'm just glad to see you, and alive. I gotta go get Mom." He hugged Burns again, then took off into the crowd of people. "What's going on here?" Burns asked. Susan gestured to the people near the flipped-over car. "We're trying to figure out the best way across the bridge. Nobody seems to believe me about the giant tentacles we saw that threw a car at you." The man with the rifle turned from his examination of the bridge. "Is this the fellow that was with you, Susan?" the man asked, squinting at Burns. "I swear I know you from somewhere. I'm Roy." He stuck his hand to shake Burns's. "Dan," Burns said, and completed the handshake, then looked back at his mother. She looked older than he remembered, but he had no doubts who she was. "I'm sorry, Mom. I don't remember what happened." Roy crumpled his face and turned red. "You don't remember a car being thrown at you? By a monster octopus?" He threw a sideways glance at Susan. "Well, that settles it. You really are full of crap." He turned and walked towards the bridge. "Wait!" Susan shouted after him. Roy threw his hand up in a non-response and kept walking. Another voice called out, a voice Burns recognized, and he felt his heart twitch. "Dan!" Warm arms embraced him from behind, and he closed his eyes, inhaling the scent of his girlfriend. "Susan was right. You did make it back." He could feel the wetness of tears on his back, and turned to embrace her. "Monica, I'm so sorry you had to see that. I am back, though, but you should know, my memory is still a mess." "We've been dealing with that. We can deal with it still," she said as she kissed him. Dan pulled back to look at her, her face cradled in his hands. "It may actually get better. That's what my symbiont, the Phoenix, says anyway." Jason, next to Monica, looked at him. "What's a symbiont?" he asked. Burns opened his mouth to respond, when screams erupted through the crowd. He turned to see a huge tentacle reaching out from the water over the side of the bridge. He barely had time to register it before the tentacle grabbed onto Roy, who had turned to run back towards them, and yanked him over the edge into the water. Chapter 13. If chaos erupted could describe anything, this was it. The small group of people surrounding Burns and his family scrambled back, some falling on their butts in their mad dash to escape. Onlookers from the larger group, who had seen what happened, screamed and ran like wild. Mothers shielded their children's eyes. Burns was used to chaos, having been a firefighter, and he knew how to handle a crowd of panicking people. He jumped onto the car and started shouting, "Everyone calm down. Back up. Stay away from the water and move back further down the road." He waved both hands in the air as if he were directing traffic. Jason began directing the group back while Monica helped calm the most panicky, and Susan offered everyone snacks. Soon everyone had moved a few dozen yards down the road. Burns made his way over, taking Monica's hand and standing in front of the crowd. The fear emanating off them was palpable, and he tried his best to speak in a calm but loud voice. "Everyone, I know what you've seen is terrible, and we need time to process. But we need to calm down and work together to figure out a way over this bridge," he said. "Why do we even have to leave? Why can't we stay in our homes?" a female voice shouted from the crowd. Susan spoke up. "We went over this. Those things will just keep coming back. It's not safe here." A woman came out of the crowd holding a young child on her hip, trying to calm the girl. "Why do you think that? We saw them burn when that boy exploded. We can fight back." "No, we can't," Burns said. "This system we are all in now, it's dangerous, and where we are is deadly to us. We need to get to a safer area, or we could all die." "How do you know this?" asked an older man near the front of the crowd. Burns gave it a moment's thought. He didn't know how much he should share about his new status without sounding crazy. "You've all been seeing system messages pop up in your field of vision, right?" A few heads nodded, so he continued. "Well, part of what I got from the system was a bit of knowledge about the system. Everything is assigned a level, a measurement of its strength and ability to survive. We," he gestured towards the crowd and himself, "are all level 1. But Shasta Forest, the area we are in, is much higher, level 60 or 80 or something." Jason's face paled at this information. "It really works like that? Like a game?" he asked. Another man spoke up. "What does that mean? I don't get it." "Well, if this system is like the way a video game works, then basically we are so insignificant to the things that live in this area that we could be killed by accident," Jason responded. The crowd rumbled at this, the younger generation nodding their heads in understanding. Burns witnessed little pockets of conversations going on. "We can worry about all that later, though," he shouted. "What I know is that we must get to a safe zone now, and the city of Shasta Lake should be that zone. We need a plan to cross this bridge. Then we need to move as fast as we can to the city." An older woman complained. "That's almost 20 miles. We'll never make it. Some of us are too old or weak to walk that far." Burns smiled at her. "That's where the system helps us," he said. "Somehow we have all become a part of it, so we have a set amount of energy that replenishes pretty quickly when you rest for just a little bit. I think you'll see that we are all hardier than before." Burns turned to look at the vehicle-strewn bridge, sighing in frustration. There were about 6 cars in the pileup, with a Pacific fuel truck jackknifed across both lanes. This gave him an idea. "Does anyone have any wind magic or anything? Something that can move stuff?" Most of the people looked at him like he was crazy. "Oh, right. Everyone concentrate and say status." Jason and some younger members of the group did so right away, and Burns watched as they were reading things he could not see. Once again, chaos erupted in the group, though this time it wasn't the chaos of panic and fear, but surprise, and maybe even a little excitement at what everyone saw. He gave them all a small amount of time to look at their status screen before addressing them again. "I know there is a lot to process there, but I urge you not to do anything to your status until we can get to a safe area and spend some time learning about this system. I need to know if anyone has any kind of wind or air manipulation abilities, something that can help me spread a liquid. Also, did anyone bring a gun?" After some jostling, several people came forward with guns, and 2 who did not. One of them, an older woman covered in turquoise jewelry, spoke. "My status thing says I have a spell called Wind Blast, but I'm not sure how it works." Burns smiled at her and took her hand, setting her up in the location he wanted while directing the others with guns to their stations. "I'm not sure how it works either. Maybe try pointing your finger and shouting the name of the spell or something." The older woman looked at him dubiously, then pointed her finger towards some bushes on the side of the road and shouted, "Wind Blast!" Nothing happened, and her face reddened. Maybe try concentrating on making a blast of wind, I guess?" Burns suggested. This time the woman pointed towards the side of the road, but said nothing, a look of hard concentration clear on her face. A massive gust of wind rocketed from her hand and blew the bushes fiercely. The woman fell over out of surprise, and Burns moved to help her up, but she lay back on the ground laughing. "Oh, that was wonderful," she shouted. "It was so easy, so amazing!" She pointed her hand in a different direction and blasted another gust of wind, laughing with pleasure once again. Burns grinned and let her have her fun, looking to the other person, a woman who looked barely out of her teens, who had also come up front. "Do you have some kind of wind magic also?" he asked her. In response, the young woman held up a stick she was carrying and pointed it toward some rocks on the side of the road. "Wingardium Leviosa!" she shouted, and a handful of rocks began to float into the air. Her face took on a look of concentration as she flicked her hand in a circular movement, the rocks to follow her motions. Burns gave her a strange look. "Was that from those kid wizard books?" The woman rolled her eyes at him. "It's Harry Potter." She flicked her wrist, and the rocks went flying across the road. Her features softened then. "It's not really the spell from the books. I have telekinesis. I just wanted to flavor it up a bit." Her smile lit up her whole face, obviously smitten with her new wizard-esque ability. "This is amazing." The crowd seemed to agree, and Burns witnessed many grins and excited cheers coming from them as pockets of conversations broke out while people tested their abilities. "Yeah, well, it's nice to see the silver lining in all this. Here's what I want you to do." Burns explained his idea to his helpers. "I need you guys to shoot holes in that fuel truck. Then you girls, I want you to use your ability to cover as much of the bridge as you can in the fuel that leaks out. Spread it on as much surface area as you can. These sea creatures are weak to fire, and I'm thinking if we make it an inferno up here, we can do some hefty damage and hopefully send them running." "Won't shooting a truck make it explode, though?" one of the gun wielders asked. "Haven't you seen that episode of Mythbusters?" the Harry Potter fan responded. "They showed that it's pretty much impossible." "How will we get through the fire, though?" he asked, acknowledging what the girl said. "I can take care of that, I think," Burns responded. They seemed satisfied enough with the plan, and everyone got into place. On Burns's mark, they fired, their guns destroying the quiet of the day. The crowd practically flinched in unison, and they all held their breath. Just as the girl and Mythbusters had said, the fuel truck did not explode, even as holes were punched through it. At his direction, the two women began their magic and spread the fuel all over the bridge, the harsh fumes wafting over to the waiting crowd. With a moment of concentration, Burns tried out his class spell, Flame Burst, and sent a jet of fire streaking low across the pavement, causing most to shield their faces as the fuel ignited the bridge into a burning conflagration. A handful of people broke from the crowd, running back to a safer distance, unsure of what would happen next. The flames followed the fuel up the lines of gushing liquid from the tanker truck, and soon it was spouting fire from everywhere, black smoke pouring out into the air. "Okay," Jason said. "The bridge is on fire. Now what?" Chapter 14. "Now," Burns said, "we draw out the squid thing." He hopped into an abandoned vehicle and popped it into neutral. "Everyone give me a hand pushing this thing down the road. Let's get it to roll across the bridge." He muscled the steering wheel, aiming the car straight down the empty lane, and hopped out so he could keep one hand on the wheel while pushing. Several others from the group came and helped push, while most remained at a much safer distance from the flames. With a final heave, the car rolled down the road and onto the burning bridge. As hoped, the tentacle snaked its way out of the water and lashed at the thing moving across the bridge. "Look, upriver!" someone shouted, and Burns's eye turned that way. What he saw startled him, and he shivered at the sheer size of the creature. A chorus of screams erupted from the crowd. The tentacle was attached to a large squid-like body, its giant head and single eyeball poking out of the water, as it latched another tentacle onto the bridge support and began hoisting itself up. The massive squid body was easily the size of the fuel truck near them, with 4 tentacles and a multifaceted eye like an insect's. Burns turned his attention back to the rolling car, hoping the flames would be enough to hurt or scare off the otherworldly beast. A hope that was dashed, as the tentacle seemed to ignore the fire altogether. It grabbed the car, lifted it up, and dragged it into the water. Everyone watched silently, their eyes darting with fear. "Great, now what? We are literally burning our bridge here," Harry Potter girl said. a little too nonchalantly for their current situation. Burns turned to the group to field other ideas when he saw several members' faces turn ashen, their mouths dropping. Spinning back around, he witnessed another tentacle on the other side of the bridge rise out of the water along with the first. Both tentacles began slamming onto the top of the bridge, fuel and flames spraying in all directions. Its strength was such that cracks started forming in the pavement, and stifled sobs could be heard from the group behind him. Burns cast his firebolt spell at a tentacle. As it hit, there was finally some kind of reaction from the creature. A blister formed where the spell had hit. This seemed to anger the creature as it began flailing the burned tentacle. In its angry lashing, the beast slammed a tentacle dead center on the fuel truck, crushing it and spraying hundreds of gallons of fuel out like a shaken soda can. The spray of liquid caught fire as it flew in every direction, leaving burning spots on the water where the gasoline floated, and causing a wave of flame heading towards the group. Everyone screamed. Burns could feel the flames as if he was connected to them, and before he even registered what he was doing, he pushed at the flaming spray of burning liquid and ripped the flames off. The flameless fuel sprayed against him and the first row of people. Behind him, members of the group ducked or raised their arms in protection. Before them, floating in the air, was a roaring, crackling ball of burning energy. Burns marveled at it. The crowd was silent, awing at the physically impossible stunt they had just witnessed. Burns ignored the chatter that broke out among the group behind him, concentrating on the ball of flame and compressing it smaller and smaller. He could feel the intensity of the temperature rising as the ball shrank. Burns noticed his mana bar draining as he toyed with the flame, and not wishing to waste any more mana, he flicked a ball of burning hot energy, now just the size of a golf ball, towards a tentacle. The flaming sphere hit dead on, then continued through the tentacle, cauterizing the wound as it burned. The bellow of rage and pain that ripped out of the mouth of the massive undersea creature was unearthly. Many of the people covered their ears, some dropping to their knees from the sheer volume of it. Burns closed his eyes, concentrating on his elemental affinity. In his mind's eye, he could see the flame, like a living entity dancing across the bridge. He could feel the connection to it through the conduit of the sun's light. "Everyone get ready to run across the bridge on my mark," he shouted, his eyes still closed. "It's still burning! Are you crazy?" a voice shouted back. Without a response, he raised his hands in the air. Imagining what he wanted to do, he spread his hands wide apart, and like some twisted scene from the Bible, the flames parted to either side of the bridge, forming massive burning walls of fire. He concentrated on the walls and began pouring his own energy into them, somehow knowing this was the catalyst that would cause the creature to avoid the flames. As if his thoughts brought the idea to life, the tentacles caught in the flames started smoking and burning. They retreated into the water as the creature screamed again. "Go! Go, now!" No one moved. Jason stood at the front of the crowd and spoke loudly. "I get it seems like a crazy idea, but this whole world is crazy now. We don't have another choice." With that, he spun on his heel and dashed across the bridge, unscathed. Burns screamed as sweat from concentrating began to break out on his brow. "You have to go now!" he shouted through clenched teeth. After another small group of people made it through the flames, the rest of the group charged through. Burns could sense the fire being drawn to the fumes of the fuel-splashed people, and he fell to his knees as he concentrated harder on holding the flames off. He heard screams as a few people were singed, but he managed to keep the fire away. The squid thing slammed the bridge from underneath, shaking it and causing some of the group to falter. Several others helped them up, and they quickened their pace as the creature took its fury out on the bottom of the bridge over and over. Cracks formed in the concrete, and members of the group shrieked. Burns' mana bottomed out, and he felt the flames roar back to the center of the bridge, where the remainder of people were still crossing. With sheer willpower and drawing on the sense of his affinity, he separated the flames again, this time his stamina bar draining completely. At long last the group made it over the bridge, and he groaned at the stress of his power as he took his first few faltering steps through. The creature continued to pummel the bridge, and a particularly hard hit knocked Burns to the ground, his concentration flailing. He closed his eyes as natural physics took over, the flames rolling back to engulf the entire bridge. Burns screamed in anticipation of his painful, burning end, squeezing his eyes closed as if it would be less painful if he didn't watch. When no pain came, he opened his eyes and gazed in wonder as the fire flickered across his body. He smiled. This would have been very helpful as a firefighter. He strolled through the flames, marveling at the absurdity of flames dancing on his skin to no effect. In his contemplation, Burns had forgotten one thing. Without his energy fueling it, the fire had become mundane once again. He paid the price of his cockiness as he registered that the creature had stopped bashing the bridge, and once again a tentacle snaked out of the water and wrapped itself around him, squeezing. Burns gasped as his ribs cracked, his health dropping by 40% in an instant. He knew he wouldn't last long like this, and shook his head violently, trying to rack his brain for a solution. An image popped into his mind, a memory, perhaps, he couldn't tell, of his body covered in flames. He was wearing his old scout uniform, the memory melting away in his confusion. The image remained, however, of himself wrapped in fire, and he called out to his affinity, attracting the flames from the bridge to himself. Just as before, the fire ripped free from the fuel, leaving a large patch of it on the roadway. Burns willed the fire to wrap itself around him, feeding it the small amount of mana he had left. Flames surrounded him like a shield. Willing the flames to stay, he concentrated again on his affinity. The tentacled creature bellowed as its fleshy protuberance started cooking. The smell of barbecued calamari came to his mind, but he had no time to revel in the scent, as the creature flung him away, sending him in a fastball special towards the group of people that had made it across the bridge. He cried out, covering his face and trying to douse his flames, hoping to do so before he crashed into them, a human Molotov cocktail. When no impact came, he opened his eyes to find the Harry Potter girl, her makeshift wand pointed straight at him, holding him aloft with her power. A thin trickle of blood dripped from her nose as she sat him down. "At least I made it across," Burns said, then passed out, falling face first to the ground. Chapter 15. Burns woke to the periodic squeak of a wheel that needed oiling. "Ugh," he moaned. "Dan!" Monica's voice exclaimed from the bike pulling the trailer he rode in. "You're awake. I thought I'd lost you again. Are you okay? I would stop, but it's starting to get dark and we wanted to get to the city. The zone we're in is only level 30 now, so we are a little safer." "How long was I out?" Burns asked. "A couple hours. We stopped a few times to check on you, but you seem to be healing fine. It's weird, though. I can literally watch your body repair itself." Burns checked his health and saw that it was at about 90%. He still had a few aches and pains, but felt good overall. "I think the system will take some getting used to," he said. Monica barked out a laugh. "Coming from my husband, who is 20 years younger than a day ago, but still has memory issues." Burns smiled, laying his head back down on the bike trailer. They rode like this until the next time they stopped for a stamina recharge break. Burns had been right. Traveling, even for the older folks, worked much better in this system, as they could stop to let their stamina recharge and be on the move again. Eventually, they crossed over the large bridge on I-5 that spanned the rise of Lake Shasta. They watched as down below the houseboats used for recreation across the massive lake were taken over by more things in the water. Huge tentacled beasts, more fish people. Some were just driven into the rocks. "This world will need some serious help," Burns said. As the day began to close, they made it across the bridge, the zone dropping even further in level. They entered the suburbs of Shasta Lake, and several messages bloomed into Burns' view. "Quest completed. Get somewhere safe." "Quest completed. Save your wife and son." "Hidden quest completed. Save the residents of Lakehead." "Congratulations. You have gained a level ×2 in Phoenix. Stats automatically assigned. You have 2 free points to spend." "Congratulations. You have gained a level ×3 in Pyromancer. No attribute points gained for subclasses." Burns breathed a sigh of relief. He had made it. His family and even most of Lakehead were safe. For now, anyway. At the bottom of the deepest point of Lake Shasta, several 𝗕𝗓𝒊𝒂 stood around a scrying bowl, watching the humans as they entered the town. One of them, a large female with an ornately decorated crest on her head, looked to the male, a muscular creature wearing a badge of authority. "My chief," she said, "why do you let the humans go? They would have provided an enormous sacrifice to 𝗕𝗿𝗪𝒀𝒀𝒂𝒃. He would have blessed us greatly." The female did not hide the anger in her voice, a challenge to his authority. "Silence, witch," the male said, and backhanded her, slamming her into the wall. With a wave of his hand, the scrying pool went blank, and he picked the witch up by her throat. "You would spend all our resources on a single benefit. This is why you will never supplant me. You seek only what aids you now, while I think for our future." He casually tossed her to the ground. "That tribe of humans will bring us sacrifices for months to come. We will raid them and sacrifice them over time, making sure our altar is never empty." The witch coughed, blood from her mouth dissipating into the water. "But what about the phoenix? Your father will not forgive you for allowing it to kill our scouts." The male 𝗕𝗓𝒊𝒂𝒂𝒃 chuckled, an evil grin coming to rest on his toothy face. "I have already taken care of that particular nuisance," he said. Deep space, the Forbidden Zone. Aboard the starship Forsworn, a light flashes, followed by a beep. A stasis tube begins its opening cycle, releasing the occupant within. Before it can process its surroundings, a message appears on the large main screen of the ship. Automated message: a phoenix has been found. Funds have been withdrawn from your account and placed within escrow awaiting verification. Time since last awakening, 997 years.